This is Weezer Pinkerton from 1996. So this is one of Chris's choices. So Chris, I have to say that if you were to ask the general population what their favorite Weezer album is, they would say the Blue Album. But when you ask diehard Weezer fans, they would say Pinkerton. Why is Pinkerton one of your favorite albums?
Oh my gosh, for many, many reasons. Definitely a coping tool of getting your heart broken. Listen to Pinkerton. That's a good one to listen to. But I also just think that for the inspirational thing aspect, I guess you can say, when it came to Rivers, just being such a great songwriter and just being, whenever we write, I think I think to myself as someone of a budding songwriter. And whenever we write, I think it's really hard, really telling the truth a lot of the time. You know what I mean? And really without feeling vulnerable or whatever it is. And I think that album was, to me, a classic example of someone who just threw it at the wall. You know what I mean? And not threw it at the wall, but like just very, very honest, like hard on your sleeve type of like approach to like songwriting with his lyrics, and like to the point where it's like embarrassing. You know what I mean? And he even says himself, writing Pinkerton was like showing up to a party and spilling your guts to all your friends and then waking up the next morning and being like, what have I done? You know what I mean? And that was his point when I read his book, and that was one of the points. He also wanted to take the thing off print. It was like that to him. But it's just, yeah, I think the songs that I felt like that I've ever tried to write and show, when I try to think about just say what it is, and regardless how embarrassing it is or how much you sound like an idiot or feel like an idiot when you're writing it, those are the ones that translate the most. And I feel like that album, just like La Bamba, it was like one CD that I had multiple times, and it got scratched, and I felt like I always needed this album in my life, kind of thing, because we didn't have Spotify back in my day, where you actually had to have
back in my day,
a physical CD and a Walkman, and yeah, like to pretty much why I like that moment is just the honesty and the vulnerability of the writing in that. And on top of it too, even like Eric was mentioning, even with some of the songs that he was like writing too, and it's just how raw the recording is, and like and how it doesn't sound, it's in a studio, but it doesn't sound like it's in a studio, kind of thing. You know what I mean? And that those are some of the main things that I really like about that album off the hop.
I'm gonna make a perhaps strange comparison, and let me know if you agree with this. So
Okay.
I find that so you have Weezer's The Blue Album, which is the big polished album that goes multi-platinum, that makes them worldwide sensations. And then you have this album, which is very raw, very stripped down, and very different. And I'm going to compare this to Nirvana. So Nirvana has Nevermind, which is the super polished, big multi-platinum album that makes them global superstars. And both bands, after those big first albums, decided that they're not a fan of that the crazy fame and super polished, and they wanted to go back to the raw sound. And I find that this is the equivalent of Nirvana's In Utero, where after Nevermind they went and got very raw and very introspective. So I find that those are kind of the two comparisons, is you have Nirvana's Nevermind and then In Utero in response to it, and then you have Weezer The Blue Album and then Pinkerton in response to it.
It's crazy. And I think there's a part with like artists that we they want to maybe switch it up. Like I couldn't imagine. There is and I'll get to another point here. Like the Blue Album came out, and it was just this massive mega thing that just launched them to like superstardom. And I think at the time, Rivers was just like, you know what? Maybe I can do no wrong.
Maybe.
Maybe I can. There's these concepts that I'm thinking in my head, and he had like little concepts of this album. And then when he recorded it, I think it just flew over everyone's head. Like, I don't think people even like, they're so used to hearing this like certain certain sound, a consistency of the Blue Album. And even though Pinkerton does have a consistency of that sound all the way through it, in my opinion, it's very different. And from the Blue Album, that people were just so used to hearing these pop bangers, you know what I mean? And then like the first, think of like the opening of the Blue Album, what put them on the map, like Buddy Holly, and then think of like the title track of like Pinkerton, which is like El Scorcho, two different like things. And any artist, would try to mix things up. But I think to the general population at the time, I think it just flew over everyone's head. And to the ones that really got into it and dug into it, they tapped into something that was like so raw and like crazy and like and fresh to them. But to like, you get a bunch of A&R, people listening to radio tracking, they'll scroll through that album and they'll just been like, next, you know what I mean? Like nothing crazier off the bat. But then after having that, like that, I guess you say, not as commercial success, as the Blue album, he turned around and said, you know what, I'm going to stick to this lane. I'm going to release the Green album. I'm going to make it very much like Beatles, like kind of like, poppy hooks, matching solos to the melody will be the solos and just play this lane and play it very, very safe. And you know what I mean? And that's what he did. And that's how he got back on there with, Hash Pipe and Island in the Sun, and got back onto that kind of like that mainstream, like pop thing level. But Pinkerton was just like a different like beast, I think. And anyone that knows of that album, that was just like me, would be inspired in many different ways. And of course, like that album itself, people, a lot of the artists that we grew up with, I guess in the early 2000s, that got really inspired by that were like Jimmy Eat World, or like Dashboard Confessional, or like the Get Up Kids, and like these emo bands that like listened to this album and thought like, and it was about them, and thought to themselves, this is, I can throw it on the line. I can be hard on my sleeve and not have to worry about it too much. It's cool because if Rivers can make it cool, I can make it cool. You know what I mean? And that's why I think it was really, really cool about that album,
Yeah, essentially Rivers gave permission to the up and coming singer-songwriters that you can be transparent and authentic and vulnerable. And it's the equivalent. I keep doing like equivalents, but it's like Kanye West when he puts out 808s and Heartbreak, which instead of him rapping, it's him singing about a dark period. And that album went on to inspire the Drakes and the J. Coles and all. So it's the equivalent. The Rivers Como did that to the Dashboard Confessionals and those guys coming on. Yeah.
Honestly, that's Joel, man. You always make some great points, man. Like even listening to like 808s and Heartbreak, I'm a big Kanye West fan. I like a lot of a lot of his stuff, and like I'm cranking a lot of his stuff in the car. And 808s and Heartbreak you're absolutely right, is like is a different beast compared to like the other stuff that he was releasing at the time, and whether it flew over other people's heads too. Like this just doesn't sound like a Kanye album at the time when I listened to it, the same way anyone can, perceive Pinkerton not sounding like a Blue album kind of thing. But you're absolutely right, man, because like I feel like that sound, a lot of those 808s, a lot of those, the singing, the auto tune, and being able to like sing melody, honestly seemed to come, in my opinion, like a little bit, and yours as well, like after that album, you notice that shift in kind of hip hop and how you can do it, and also in like commercial successful songs, like you hear that influence from it. You're absolutely right, man.
And both of those albums were basically got mixed or negative reviews upon release. And then over time, so 808s and Heartbreak is now considered one of the most influential albums of all time. And it actually shows up on the list of greatest albums of all time because it popularized the auto tune with rappers. So you had the T-Pains, but that was like in pop music. So you had the rappers that are now allowed to, even though they can't sing, rappers can now sing and use auto tune for a sound. It allows rappers they don't have to necessarily rap. They can also sing. The honesty that he showed on that album. And yeah, you have the Drakes and all those guys that come up later. So with Pinkerton, there was 3 singles. So you have El Scorcho, The Good Life, and Pink Triangle. And we mentioned that none of them really hit that hard. And when you don't have any hit singles, the album sales don't tend to come because there's nothing pushing people to go buy it. And what's wild is it's over the years that Pinkerton has become super critically acclaimed, and it shows up on the list of the greatest albums of all time now. Like it's ahead of its time because people had expectations. And when it wasn't another Blue album, they panned it. And it's like, if you remove the expectations and just looked at it as a work of art, people might have got it right away. And to show how much the perception has changed is that the album comes out in 1996 and doesn't do much. And then in 1996, in 2016, 20 years later, it goes platinum.
Right?
Really?
And they did end up doing a tour of doing just the Blue Album and Pinkerton
Really?
for one round there. Isn't that nuts? Like, and you can only think of like you know how Rivers would have been at the time, like just so self-conscious. And then now it's like, you know what? You can look back at that now and just be, you know what? I stuck to it. My genius has surfaced, and everyone can recognize what that is.
But I gotta say though, Weezer, like I'm not as hardcore of a Weezer fan, but I mean they've managed to stay so relevant in the modern age. Like they come up with something that one about the dog, like they wrote a song with like the dogs or whatever. Like they're just always trying to just stay relevant, and that's so cool for a band from like the 90s, like to be like on the Spotify tip, release the album of covers, like kudos to Weezer. Definitely, like they're attracting new fans.
They're so relevant that I'm seeing them headline a festival on Friday next week in Ottawa.
Nice.
So it's Weezer's headlining, and Billy Talent's one of the openers, and they have the big single together.
That was great.
So they'll obviously, if one is playing after the other, I'm assuming Rivers will come out for that single with Billy Talent.
Isn't that nuts?
That's
like,
so cool.
Like our heroes are playing with like the guys who grew up in our backyard. You know what I mean? And even even on the Mississauga Walk of Fame, there's a songwriter by the name of Rob Wells. And he just posted right now, doesn't have a gazillion followers. I took a songwriting course from him online during the pandemic. And he just made a post saying that he just collaborated on a song with Rivers Cuomo and Weezer. You know what I mean? It's nuts. You know what I mean? It's such a small world, and it's crazy, you know?
Yeah. So the reason behind the shift in sound and tone of the album between the Blue Album and Pinkerton is, I didn't know this, but Rivers Cuomo, I always have trouble with his name, Rivers Cuomo. He was born with one leg quite a bit shorter than the other. And for 8 weeks leading up to the recording of this album, he went in for surgery where they lengthened one of his legs. And so for 8 weeks, he was hospitalized on painkillers, had to walk with a crutch, he was just in such a horrible place, as well as him hating the fame and the negative things of fame that came with the previous album. That's what put him in that dark, vulnerable mindset that led to what became Pinkerton. And what's crazy is this was supposed to be a rock opera. So they ended up changing, and eventually it became Pinkerton, but it was supposed to be a rock opera called Songs from the Black Hole. Talk about as dark as possible. And also, once they abandoned the rock opera and it became Pinkerton, before it was named Pinkerton, it was almost called Playboy, like probably making fun of he talks a lot about sex and like meaninglessness and all that stuff on this album. So it's probably a play on that. So it was almost called Playboy, and it was almost called Diving into the Wreck. So it's like this beloved album that could have been completely different, could have been a space rock opera. It could have been named something different. It's hard to imagine these things that we love could have easily been something else altogether.
What's really, really cool, like to the Pinkerton fans too, if you listen to Rivers' home recordings, that album, you'll see on you'll hear and listen to a lot of the songs that could have been potentially like the Weezer, like the rock opera like songs where he's super friend, and there's other songs where it's pretty much him and another person, and they're in space with this girl, and he went concept with it, you know what I mean? And he's a very creative guy, and it's so crazy that you're saying I remember what you're talking about, like he is lengthening his leg. You can see there's a performance on The Late Show or something where he's doing Say It Ain't So, and he's wearing these very baggy pants, and underneath those pants he's very stationary. He's not moving around too much because he can't move. He's got these braces on his legs that were lengthening him. But also during that time he was going to school. I think he was going to Harvard or something like that, and he'd black out his windows, and he'd be he grew his facial hair really, really long, and he didn't want anyone to kind of recognize him. And he'd be walking around campus, and girls be wearing Weezer shirts, and he'd be walking right by them. He just wanted to be like, I'm the guy. I'm Rivers. Look at me. You know what I mean? But there's also those parts where he didn't want to expose himself, and you know what I mean, and be known around as the rock star that he was, kind of thing. So I can only just imagine, you put yourself in a position mentally of how this person would have been at that time. He's just an interesting guy, and he writes amazing songs, and it's maybe all that stuff contributes to why he is so such a great songwriter and so as creative as he is, you know.
So one more thing about how deep he went with this is the album is named after a character in a book. So a character called B.F. Pinkerton. It's from a book called Madame Butterfly. So there's a song on the album, the last song called Butterfly. So tying everything together. So Rivers calls that character an asshole American sailor, similar to a touring rock star. So Pinkerton based it off of kind of this asshole character being like, that's what we've become. Like, it's, even though it's a dark album, it's like you can see his kind of sense of humor underlying everything as well.
That's another thing. I'll make a quick point before we wrap up the Pinkerton thing, is just like in the lyrics that he has in that, why I love it with the vulnerability is you see him like making fun of himself a lot, and like, but like it almost like making fun of himself where you're like laugh crying. You know what I'm saying? And like, and to have that type of like ability to write like that and that creativity, you know, it's just, yeah, anyone that can put themselves in those types of zones when writing and be creative like that, it's like I got to tip my hat, and it was just so engaging to me, especially going through like hard times in my own life with relationships and things that I felt like, man, you have these awesome opportunity, but what's wrong with you? You know, what's wrong with me? You know what I mean? And that's what awesome part about that album was, like you can listen to it back to front, no skip, and just like it all tugs on the heartstrings. It's a great album. I love it.
So I have a few more random points about Pinkerton, and then we'll move on to your fourth album. So the day before Weezer was going to release Pinkerton, a security company called Pinkerton Inc. sued the band with a restraining order, basically saying you cannot release the album because it'll damage our brand. And like, nobody knew this company and any of Weezer, this like global brand. So a judge quickly threw out the case, saying it would be way more damaging to Weezer's label Geffen if we didn't release this album than it would be to your security company if we did release the album. So they threw it out. But just a random fact, a security company trying to get in on it, you know?
Oh my gosh, just try to grab at anything at that point with these guys. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So El Scorcho, the single, I used to cover that back in the day. I forgot about that till now. So the title, because it's a weird title, like what's El Scorcho? So apparently they were at a restaurant called Del Taco, and there is a hot sauce called Del Scorcho from Del Taco. So that's where they got the name, was from a taco place.
Del Taco's a chain out here. Yeah, it's like a, what's it called? Taco Bell.
Taco Bell, yeah. One of the first places we ate out here was in Del Taco.
It was Del Taco, yeah.
Yeah, so
stomach aches from Del Taco out here. It's great.
Yeah, you got the Del Scorcho for sure. So
I got the Del Scorcho. Okay.
So despite there being a lot of negative reviews for the album when it came out, the last song, Butterfly, the acoustic song that you've mentioned a few times, despite negative or mixed reviews, everyone agreed, even back then, that was like a showstopper. That was like the highlight of the album. Is there anything you want to say about Butterfly? Because it's definitely a standout track.
Like, just the fact that like I said, like an acoustic song that gets capped off. I always felt that with every Weezer album that was ever released, there's something special with the last song that he releases. And I think it's very purpose. It's not necessarily he's trying to release some banger or some kind of like, it's just something that's very much personal to him, or something very, you got to be a Weezer fan to understand, I guess, in that sense. But once again, like the vulnerability of like, and just, of like this beautiful song, and also just like the lyrics that he's writing. Like I remember just even singing like I used to listen to that song when I used to work construction framing. Every day I'd put that thing on and I'd be hammering away, and I remember singing the song. I remember the line, smell you on my hand for days, I can't wash away your scent. And I remember singing this, if I'm a dog then you're a bitch. Like I'm singing this beautiful love song, and then I remember like my coworker, he like looks over, he's like, smell you on my hand for days. What the hell does what?
He's like listening to Metallica, like, and
you think about it, like, you know what I mean, like just imagine like you're this guy and you're like falling in love with this girl, and like, you know what I mean, and you do stuff with them, and like, you know, you're like, you know, maybe you got to second base, and maybe in your own fucking sick twisted head you're just like, you got there, you're just, It sounds a little weird what I'm saying right now, but like that's the vulnerability that I'm talking about. That's like the shit that like no one would write about. You know what I mean? Like I don't, and it's just and he's writing it in a freaking love song, and it's just like and the apology in the song when he ends the tag off with like I'm sorry, and like there's something that happened there. You know
And he
what I
just
mean?
keeps
Like,
saying, I'm sorry,
I'm
right?
sorry, and like and you hear this like this yeah, exactly, this very very like honest, you know, apology, and like you're listening to this and it's just like it's all those things in that element. Not to sound like such an emo kid, but like I gotta respect people that know how to just put themselves out there. And I feel like even like a songwriter, you know, myself, it's just like I'd love to be able to write half the things that are on my head without feeling like I'm tripping people out or offending this, offending that, or that this person, that person, or whatever it is. And like there's so many, and I think it gets to a point where you almost got to let it go. And when you can let it go is when people are really going to gravitate towards it. You know what I mean? That's the inspiration, I think, when it comes to that album for me, is just like a person that was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna go for it, and no matter what. And then waking up the next morning and feeling like, what the hell have I done? But at least getting to that point of like vulnerability and honesty and releasing it. And it just goes to show that it goes over all these years, 20 years later, and people dig it, and people, you know, and it still got sold, and it's still, that album was still toured, and it all speaks for itself.
Yeah. So two final points about fans and critics and the band itself accepting it as the years have gone by. So in 2003, Pitchfork gave Pinkerton a perfect score and named it the 53rd greatest album of the 90s. And in 2004, Rolling Stone gave the album a new review, giving it 5 out of 5, adding it to the Rolling Stone Hall of Fame. So those are critics coming around, and then the band itself. So by 2008, Rivers reconsidered the album, saying Pinkerton's great. It's super deep, brave, and authentic. Listening to it, I can tell that I was really going for it when I wrote and recorded a lot of those songs. And then in 2010, he said Pinkerton has definitely taken on a life of its own and become more successful and more accepted. As an artist, you have to just do what you believe in at the time, whether it's accepted or not. You just have to keep going with it. So there we go.
Inspiring.
Yeah, it's awesome.